going to ask for Raj to start. Just give me 1 second. Yep, I think we're good to go. All right, so Raj, if you could just share your story, and I'll leave it to you. You're muted. Yeah.
Right, sorry. Yeah, it's a newbie error. I was just saying thank you for that introduction, Z. And I'm going to open the chat window now. So if at any point I cut out or you can't hear me, just type in there and I'll repeat myself, or we can see if it's a signal thing or anything. So I'm conscious that, in the interest of time, I'll try and keep this as high level as I can while still providing the requisite amount of detail. So I was born and raised in Wolverhampton, and we moved to Canada when I was a kid. My parents are both labourers. Nobody went to, university in my family. I'm the first to, complete A-levels. My mum didn't do that, neither did my dad. We moved to Canada, so I did all of my high schooling and my A-levels there. I did my first degree at the University of Toronto in biology and politics, double majored. And then I came to Warwick in 2007 to do my law degree. You might ask why I didn't do the GDL. I didn't actually know about it at the time, and the GDL is not an internationally recognized law qualification. So if I did my GDL and decided to either move back to the States or Canada, it wouldn't have been possible. So I decided to do the full LLB, and that's how I know Z. We met at Warwick. Now, my reason for becoming or wanting to become a lawyer was very much grounded in public policy, social justice. So I spent many years trying to get jobs in that area. Initially I was applying for mini pupilages. I thought I wanted to be a barrister. And, then I was applying for vacation schemes, and I was always focused on sort of the human rights type places. And after that, it kind of turned into, human rights isn't working, family law, child law, anything else that was sort of remotely social justice oriented that I could get myself into. Now, I should say that it was very early on in my academic career that I decided not to pursue the bar, and that wasn't because it wasn't of interest to me. I just, and whether I was right or wrong, I didn't feel that I was competitive enough to, become a barrister. I was quite acutely aware of that stage, how hard it was to get a pupillage and things like that. So I decided, I'm just going to do the solicitor route and see what happens. So we graduated in 2010. I graduated without a training contract, nothing on the horizon. And I sort of, continued to bang on the doors of every human rights firm, every, child law, family law specialist that I could think of up and down the country. And, I very much knew at this stage that training contract is a numbers game. The more applications you do, eventually one will stick. They generally tend to say 20 applications, 5 interviews and 1 offer. And it wasn't happening. So I was doing around 30 or 40 applications a year from 2009 and just falling flat each and every time. And I was kind of despairing a bit as well. It was really confusing. It was really hard. I didn't have any lawyers in the family that I could turn to for advice. So, after a long, hard look at what my options were, a dear friend of mine and Z's just sat down and said, Raja, look, there's an element of beggars can't be choosers. And what matters more than anything right now is that you just get qualified. Stop cutting out the commercial firms, stop thinking that you don't want to take a training contract there, just get qualified. So I did, I sort of completely steered the tanker and thought, okay, fine, now I'm going to aggressively pursue training contracts in corporate and commercial. So in 2010, I graduated without a training contract. I had a job offer from MAC to be a makeup artist. So I did that for a year. And while I was doing my job at MAC, I started applying for city jobs. I thought, you know what? Anything that looks sexy to these big law firms, I'll take it, whether that's banking or consulting, whatever. I'll just, get myself through the door. And I got offered a job at Accenture in May of 2011. And sure enough, when I had Accenture on my application form, I had a very different reception from the law firms. So within 10 months of having my job at Accenture, I was offered a training contract at Travers Smith. And I must state, I have never had any ambition of being a corporate or commercial lawyer, but at this stage, I was just really, really happy that somebody was going to pay for my LPC and somebody was going to get me qualified, because we were looking at a post-recession climate. There were just no jobs, and you kind of had to take what you got then, really. So I quit Accenture, started to project manage. I thought, why am I going to work for Accenture? They're charging me out at hundreds of pounds a day and then paying me a salary. Why don't I just go freelance? So I had a year to kill before my LPC started, and I became a freelancer. And in that time, I project managed the pan-European rollout of the McDonald's touchscreen. I don't know if anyone has been to a McDonald's recently, in the before times. But I worked on the European rollout of that touchscreen ordering system. And, I did some work for Marks and Spencer's, blah, 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 just to make money until my LPC started, because obviously I have to live, right? Did my LPC, trained at Travers, kind of knew very early on that Travers wasn't the place for me. And we can talk more about that later, but it just wasn't. So as soon as I qualified, and I wasn't made an offer on qualification, and I will now, after many years, admit that without crying. And I left, which I think now is probably a big blessing in hindsight, and I joined a startup. I was employee number 6. I was head of legal and head of operations, and within a year, we'd hired 40 people and had millions of pounds of revenue coming through the door. It was an amazing experience. And then that's kind of when I realized I love doing this. I love building businesses. I love solving problems. And that's kind of what I've done for the last 3 years. I've worked for startups as head of legal, which means I, do all their contracts, and then head of operations, which means I figure out how to make the business run. So, for example, if the client I'm working for sells sweeties, I figure out, where should those sweets be manufactured? How, what ingredients should we be using? What should the supply chain look like? What's the logistics framework we should have? How should we be ensuring, proper delivery? It's kind of like a chief operating officer role where I kind of oversee the mechanics of the business. And I really enjoy that. However, as you may have noticed, none of these things appeal to my broader social justice sort of community activism interests. So while I was at Travers Smith, I launched the Pink Laddu Project. The Pink Laddu Project is a global gender equality campaign. We try to dismantle patriarchy by pulling apart the customs that keep it together. We focus on one main custom in particular, which is trying to encourage South Asians to celebrate the births of girls with as much enthusiasm as they celebrate the births of boys. Now, this is, again, something that I can talk about at length in a different forum, but I think it's important to remember that actually whilst I was at Travers, because my heart wasn't in it, I was feeling really, really stifled. And there were a number of different social justice projects I thought of whilst I was, doing my commercial work. Some of them I had to abandon. Some sort of human rights stuff I had to abandon was centered around state crimes in India for reasons of personal safety. And so eventually I found something that spoke to me. My day job pays the bills, and then Pink Laddu sort of keeps me alive. But I've managed to sort of reconcile the two by working for startups that do things that I think are interesting, that are industry changing, that are kind of challenging the big corporate giants. I find that quite fun. It is still a bit soul destroying, but a lot less than it would be for me if I was just in a traditional corporate. So that's kind of the broad overview of my journey professionally. I've also got, I published a book last year called Stories for South Asian Supergirls. My approach to that was also very similar. I had decided I'm not going to pitch my book to Penguin and let 5 old white men tell me that there isn't a market for my book. I know there is, so I went and found a publisher who could get my book into like Waterstones and Foyles and Barnes and Noble, but who was also small enough that they'd be interested in me and what I had built. So what I've learned over the last few years is that when you're asking for something, you have to be bringing something to the table as well. Like it's very much a quid pro quo relationship, and that's what I've learned. I think, you know, and I'm conscious I've been talking for 10 minutes. I should probably try and wrap this up. I often think, you know, what do I wish I knew when I was really, really struggling? Like, it was kind of a running joke between our friends that, you know, if Raj doesn't get a training contract this year, she's going to jump off a bridge. And like, I kind of half meant it. Like, it was really soul destroying. I kind of wish I knew that that the rejection isn't personal. So I think now I'll get into my sort of nuggets of wisdom. And I've got 5. And one is, you must get comfortable with rejection. You must, you must, you must. If you are the type of person that, you know, will sit there and lose sleep over 1 or 2 rejections, you need to develop a thicker skin. I have done around 80 to 90 applications. I wasn't even getting interviews. In the 3 years of applying for training contracts, I had 3 interviews and 1 offer. So you need to get comfortable with rejection. You need to be able to stare it in the face and not take it personally. The second thing is, you need to resist the urge of getting into the cult of individualism, and I'll explain why. If you get into this mentality where you think that my success is my success and it's all because of me, I've worked hard, there's no luck, it's all because of me, then you will have to approach your failures in the same way. And that can be really, really difficult. I think it's really important to retain a measured approach in, you know, towards your success, accepting that some of it is hard work, some of it is luck, and some of it is market forces, because you need to be able to see your failures that way as well if you want, you know, to develop a thick skin. This is very much a marathon, not a sprint, and you need to develop that mindset if you're going to keep going. The third, and I think this can be quite difficult, is accept that there is a lot of discrimination and racism on all levels. It's perhaps not as direct as it was for our parents, but it's still very much there. It's more insidious, it's more subliminal, and it does hold brown people back. That is just a fact. That's a fact of life. It doesn't mean that people are going to be calling you racial slurs to your face. It just means that, you know, they expect you to be a certain way. There is a sort of diminished expectation they have of you, of your intelligence, of your capability, of your ability to fit in, of your ability to succeed, of your ability to win clients. It's there. It's very much there. And I've seen it in, you know, some very perverse, direct ways, and some in, you know, very sort of underlying ways as well. And the fourth thing I want to say is that do not fall into the prestige trap. I know I fell victim to this, you know, over many years in my career. First, it was, I only want to get a training contract with the best firm. Everything else is like stinky and, you know, I don't want to work there. And then it was, you know, I only want to qualify into the best department. I only want to, you know, apply to the best firms. Honestly, there is a hairline difference between all of these firms, and I can't speak for Chambers, but I know this for commercial firms. Do not be snotty. Do not fall into the prestige trap. Don't start thinking that, you know, you want to work somewhere because it's more prestigious than the other. At the end of the day, it will all look just as good on your CV. So don't fall into the prestige trap, and because you will then sort of beat yourself up about it if any of these places reject you, and you'll start to feel inferior. It's just not worth it. Do not put them on a pedestal. I've learned this the hard way. You know, I've been invited to interviews at firms that I basically worshipped, and they treated me so badly in these interviews that I've often left crying and like sort of tearing out my hair. That how can people who, you know, claim to be committed to certain ideals treat someone so badly? So don't put anyone on a pedestal. Do not. It's not worth it. And the last thing I think I want to say, and I'll end on this note, is I think the most important thing to remember is that you just need to find a way. Again, and this kind of links into the prestige trap as well. Don't worry that, you know, your CV might not look as sexy to an alien landing, you know, from Mars, that, oh, you didn't train at Clifford Chance, or, you know, maybe Doughty Street didn't give you your pupillage. Don't worry about the prestige. Just find a way. And I think this really, I'm really grateful for the advice that I received in 2010 when a friend said, look, Raj, just apply somewhere, just get qualified. Because actually just getting qualified and getting on the road to becoming a lawyer has allowed me to now forge my own path. Now I'm in a position where I can actually say, if tomorrow I decide I want to be a family lawyer, I can steer this tanker and I can start working towards that. But if I hadn't accepted a training contract, I'd be in a position where I wouldn't even be qualified, and that would just be a pipe dream. So just figure out what you love and then find a way through it. You know, I'm not saying that you should just take the first thing that comes to you, but don't let yourself feel that maybe your offer isn't good enough, or, you know, maybe you should hold out for something a bit more prestigious. So just, you know, find a way to do what you love, and I do think the rest will fall in place. I think there's a lot to be said for how the universe will work with you to find work that meets your objectives and your goals. And my last, actually, this is 6 nuggets of advice: do not self-fund the LPC if you can avoid it. I can talk more about this later, but it will not make you a more attractive candidate. There's a lot of people I meet who think, oh, if I self-fund the LPC, a firm is more likely to give me a training contract because they're saving £6,000 on their LPC. Absolutely not true. It will not make you more desirable. Only pay for it if you can really afford it. It doesn't increase your chances at all. I think I'm going to end on that note.
Raj, thank you so much for that quick overview of what's been a fascinating however many years. A real story for anybody that might be able to relate to some of those points that you've made, and it's always good to hear about those alternative paths that people have had where they've not necessarily gone straight into a training contract or straight into a pupillage. And what I'm really trying to do through this platform is actually try and platform and showcase people's journeys that have been a little bit different, or where there's been particular adversities, and not always necessarily kind of just showcasing all of the kind of, you know, the rose tinted approach to careers in law, because it's not always glamorous. So thanks so much, Raj. And again, just a reminder, if anyone's got any questions out of what Raj has said, then please begin to put them in the chat box and we will take questions at the end. And I'd like to now please move on to Alex and ask Alex to share his story with us all, please.
Sure, hi there. Let me just get set up. Hi, so I'm Alex. I am not quite so interesting as Raj, so I'm going to break my, I think, 10 minutes down in a little differently. I'm going to very briefly talk about my background, but then I thought it would be useful to talk about sort of stuff I've learned at every stage getting to the bar, and now I'm here as to when I look back at the stuff that went well and which didn't. So very briefly as to my background. So my mum's a social worker, my dad's a hairdresser, as you can tell. I didn't know I wanted to be a barrister at school. I didn't really know what a barrister was, barely knew what a lawyer was, other than from TV and film. The reason I went into law at university was because I enjoyed debating at school. And a careers advisor told me at one point that, you know, a career in law was really for posh people. Having come from a debating sort of background, I guess, at school, but I don't know what that means. I sort of rebelled against that, so did law at university. I'll talk about the stuff I did at university, which I think helped in applications later on, but I'll get onto that when I talk about what I learned. So I went to university, did law. I came out of university, did some stuff after by way of working in charities and human rightsy stuff. Then I did pupillage, and now I'm a barrister specializing in public law, human rightsy stuff, and private client, which is sort of trusts and stuff to do with money, which is interesting. So as to the stuff I learned, so if I break it down into each stage of my process at least, and then talk about the elements of each of those stages. So at university, if I start with that, I did a lot of mooting. Once I got to university, I realized that there were these two different aspects of a career in law, the bar or solicitors. There's a lot more than that, obviously, with a law degree. But for me, I felt I wanted to be a lawyer when I was at university. And so I had to decide between those two options. I did mooting because it was, in my head, quite similar to debating, and it gave the opportunity to basically pretend to be a lawyer, which my arrogant self loved. The thing I'd recommend at university, though, above all else, you'll hear all these careers advisors, all these other people advising you to sort of almost pack your CVs at university. For me, I fell into the trap of doing a bit too much at university. So I did mooting, I did, I was on boards of these societies at university, and I felt actually afterwards that that was to the disadvantage of my grades. So what I would say first and foremost is you're at university to study, and also to have a nice time, but study. So first and foremost, concentrate on your degree. That's just my experience. Other people may feel that it's important to get your CV excellent at university, but if it's at the expense of grades, maybe pull back on it a little bit. So having just done the SIFT and interviewing for pupillage for Outer Temple MySet, everyone who's applying is excellent, and grades, if your grades aren't as quite so good as everyone else, you're stunned out for the wrong reasons. So grades is just one of the things that is a given in applications for pupillage. So get good grades. It sounds obvious. The other thing that I thought was quite cool at university was the opportunity to write essays in like student journals and things like that about areas of interest. So there are two reasons I thought that was quite good. Was because one, it gives you expertise and sort of an insight into a particular area of law that helps for exams, but also is good sort of standing for if you have interviews later on. And the second reason was because you can put it on your CV, and it's quite an easy thing to do independently of, it doesn't take a week like a mini pupillage would take a week. You could write an article or an essay or something for your student journal in an afternoon, and it's a line on your CV. So that was pretty cool. So that's university. Obviously, while you're at university, explore different opportunities like law fairs and stuff like that as to which area of law and what type of lawyer, if you want to be a lawyer, you want to be. They're very different jobs, solicitor and barrister, and even within each of those jobs, each practice area is a completely different job. So my best friend is a criminal barrister like Z, and I just have a completely different job to her. So look to different practice areas and also different legal routes, I guess, as to what fits your personality better and your interest, obviously. So that's university. After university, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer, but perhaps like Raj, was conscious of the sort of the competition that goes into training contracts and pupillage. And I came out of university at Exeter University with a 2-1, which is, it's a good university, but it is kind of average when you're applying for training contracts and pupillages. So I felt that I had to get something on my CV that would make me stand out a bit more. I had always had an interest in human rights and helping people and that sort of stuff. So I moved to India and worked for the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. And over there did stuff on women's rights and LGBT rights for quite a while. And that was fascinating because it gives you the opportunity to put something on your CV that's a little different, but it's also, and it sounds really trite, but it's a life experience that now I'm in a career that I'm likely to be in for the next 40 years. I can look back on that time and think, wow, that was interesting and I enjoyed that and it was different, as opposed to my peers who perhaps came straight through from university, which is possible. I then moved home and worked in a charity called the Human Dignity Trust, which litigates to decriminalize homosexuality around the world. So that was sort of like, I was very aware that human rights is very legal by almost definition, but I felt the need to hone in my experience into sort of more specific litigation things. I then worked in Parliament for a lady called Baroness Scotland for a while. As to choosing what experience you might get after university, my advice on this is to look at the sort of sets or firms for the bar, if I talk about the bar, sort of sets that you think you might want to apply to. So I was very interested in the human rightsy sets, the classic human rights ones. So I looked at their junior tenants and the experience that they had had before they started pupillage, as to the sort of stuff that Chambers was looking for from its applicants. So working in charities, working in human rights organizations, that sort of stuff was the sort of stuff their junior tenants had done. And so that was my advice as to picking the sort of experiences you have if you want to work before you apply for pupillage or the BPTC. So then comes the expensive bits, which is the bar practical training course. I think it's changed recently. So this was my experience, and I think it's probably still going to be very expensive just by virtue of having to take a year out of working. So there were two recommendations I had on this. One is don't be afraid to apply for the scholarships. It sounds so obvious, but they are there and people do get them. Practice hard for those scholarships, because it can be the difference between doing the BPTC and not doing the BPTC. Don't be afraid if you are rejected in the first sort of sift of doing the scholarships, because a lot of people apply for these scholarships, and if you don't get them, don't be afraid to apply next year. So, you know, do a best interest analysis type thing, or I'm still at work, and work out whether it would be in your best interest to sort of wait a year, get a bit more experience, and reapply for scholarships next year, as opposed to spending what, when I did it, was almost 20 grand on a course. So those are the scholarships. Maybe scholarships can be a different conversation, or if anyone's got a question about scholarship applications, etc., bung it in the chat box thing. The other point was I did my BPTC part-time. I couldn't afford to do it full-time, even though I got a scholarship. It was just not possible to sort of pay for my rent on top of everything else. And so I worked full-time while doing it part-time. And that I found really, really beneficial. One, because I could pay for rent, which is obviously beneficial. And two, because it gave me an extra year to gain experience that I wouldn't have had I done the course full-time and taken a year out to do it. So that was cool. Again, if there's any questions about the BPTC or applying for it or doing it, drop a question in the box. Then comes the, I think, worst time in my life ever, which was pupillage applications. I completely share what Raj was saying about rejection. So it is, in many ways, a luck game. I think everyone has to meet a certain standard to even, as it were, be in the game, because everyone is excellent. As I said, everyone who applies is likely to be impressive in some way. Beyond that, it's really over to you putting yourself in the best light, but also then luck. So I applied for, you know, I made dozens of applications like Raj. I got interviews and second round interviews, and then was lucky enough to be offered a pupillage. But that little period whereby every day you're checking your emails and every bing of your phone is another rejection from a chambers that you and your mind had fallen in love with, and imagining yourself as a sort of 60-year-old barrister swanning around those halls. And then they reject you for no apparent reason. It's soul destroying. So just know that what you see on websites or in talks and all this sort of stuff of barristers or solicitors who you think you want to do that job, just know that prior to this talk or prior to their website profile, they've been rejected hundreds of times in the past. So everyone goes through it. As to pupillage applications, what I would say by way of advice is that on the paper applications, most chambers nowadays, I understand, use a mark scheme to make sure that it's an objective standard. So points will be given for certain things like academics or experience or mini pupillages, that sort of stuff. So in terms of your application, hitting up the most obvious point scoring sort of things might be useful. So if you know that your careers experience is far more interesting or beneficial to your application than your academics, hone that in and really hammer that home in your questions, because the pupillage scheme, the pupillage gateway form basically has, it'll ask you what your academics are, what your careers experience is, but then it has questions as to, you know, why you want to be a barrister, why this chambers, that sort of stuff. And you get the opportunity then to put forward at the forefront what your best selling point is. So sell yourself. If you're applying to be a barrister, you should be able to advocate. And that's so annoying, but that's true. The other thing as to pupillage applications is the structure of your questions is so important. So get people to read your questions, and especially people I would advise that don't do law or have never done law. If they understand what you're trying to say in 100 words, then you've probably got the right tone. As I said, I've just done the sift for my chamber, well, some of the sift for my chambers, and how it works is we get sent sort of 30 or 40 applications and a mark scheme. And I went to court, had a long day in court, came home to these 40 applications. I'm sat there at sort of 8 o'clock at night looking at 40 applications, which are all excellent. I hate all of the applicants because they're all better than me. And so what I wanted was people to get to the point quite quickly with a good structure. So I didn't have to stay up until midnight reading all these essays about people's, Duke of Edinburgh Award and stuff like that. So keep a structure, know your audience, and note that people are likely to be a bit grumpy. So on that note, all I would say is that if anyone has any questions about advice at each of the stages, drop it in the box. I know some people already have, so I won't steal the limelight too much. But maybe if I end on my experience of this job, because I am quite new to it, so I was called in 2015. I can't think of doing anything better than this job. I went into it hoping to help people, and it sounds really lame, but actually every day you do get that opportunity, and it's a real privilege to represent vulnerable people and then see the result of your hard work as being making someone else's life better. And that, as I said, is a massive privilege, and I can't imagine doing anything better than that. The other point about the bar, I can't talk to the solicitor route, but at the bar, because you're mostly self-employed, there are some employed barristers. You have the flexibility to explore whatever interests you effectively. So I'm particularly interested in human rights and mental health, and therefore I'm at the moment doing some more academic articles and journals and things like that. I'm self-employed. I don't have a boss. No one tells me what I have to do, or whatever. So I woke up today at sort of 10 o'clock in the morning and did a bit of writing on academic journals, sat in my pajamas most of the day, and then sort of chatting to you lovely people. So self-employment, love it. Anyway, if there are any questions, do pop them in the box, and I'll now give over to someone far more interesting than me to talk about their journey.
Alex, thanks so much for that. I think that was fantastic, and I think those practical kind of points for each of those different stages of your career have been really, really helpful and insightful. And there's a couple of questions, so no doubt we'll come to those at the end. I'm going to ask Zed to come on and unmute himself and share his journey.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good to go, Zed.
Perfect. Okay, hi. Well, I'm Zed. That's a nickname. Feel free to call me Zed. I'm a criminal defence solicitor advocate, now working in Sheffield, but prior to being in Sheffield, I was in London. I was born and bred in London. What I want to do is I want to talk to you about, there's many things that I could talk to you about, but I'm going to, I think, narrow it down to 4 things. And then hopefully what I'll do is I'll bring those 4 things out through my journey on becoming a lawyer. So there's 4 things. The first thing is perseverance. The second thing is going to be networking. The third thing is going to be work experience. And the last thing is going to be individuals not thinking that any job is beneath them. And I'll explain that when I eventually get to it. So my parents are from Pakistan. They came to England late 60s, early 70s. I'm the eldest of 6 children. I'm the only one, very similar to Raj, that went to university. I was brought up in a deprived area of North London. I went to comprehensive school in North London. I didn't want to go to university. I had no idea that I wanted to be a lawyer, but it was really by default that I ended up becoming a lawyer, and it's a job that I love, and I don't regret becoming a lawyer at all. In fact, when I left school, I wanted to be a police officer, but because of my asthma, I was not taken on. And what I then decided to do is I went through the Times newspaper, went through the clearing section, so I had no intention of going to university, went through the clearing section alphabetically, worked through, and eventually got to Derby University, who said that they would take me. So the first set of people to offer me a place, not on a degree, but on a diploma for business and finance. So I decided to take it. Derby University at the time, the year before, it was not a university, it was a college of higher education. So it ranked fairly low. And I apologise to those that are going to Derby now. I know it's improved a lot since that time, but it certainly wasn't one of these prestigious universities. I was doing business and finance there, and on that course I did a module on company law and really enjoyed it. So I thought, oh, do you know what, I'll give law a try. So I then jumped onto a degree, which was a mixed degree of law and human resource management. And on there I did a criminal law module, which I fell in love with almost immediately, and then decided that I would like to become an advocate, a barrister, ideally. I went to law school in London. I was called to the bar in 1998. I was naive in thinking that I would be able to get a pupillage. And the reason I was naive was because I was never told by my law school, never told by my university that it is a competitive world out there in the legal world. And that's one of the things that you've got to realize. It is extremely competitive. And I think it's more competitive now than it was back in the 1990s, early 2000s. So be prepared for that competition. You've got to remember that universities are like businesses now. So they're not going to really paint a picture whereby they're going to tell you that, you know what, it's going to be difficult for you to get pupillage. It's going to be difficult for you to get training contract. It's only when I deal with students that come and do work experience and I say to them, or I ask them, what have the university told you about your chances of securing a pupillage or a training contract? And some of the unrealistic answers I get absolutely astound me. So you know, do some research, speak to professionals and find out from them what are the chances of securing training contracts and pupillages, because like I say, it's very, very competitive. Anyway, called to the bar in 98. I wanted to be a barrister. I couldn't secure a pupillage. I decided to remain in legal work. I decided to work as an admin assistant for Her Majesty's Court Service at Edmonton County Court. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to stay within the legal field. Although I wasn't doing legal work, I was surrounding myself with legal people. So I was coming into contact with judges and barristers and solicitors. And the reason I was doing that was that I was hoping that somewhere along the line there might be somebody that might give me an opportunity. So there are many things that will knock you back. And that's why the first word that I used was perseverance. You have to persevere. You have to keep knocking on doors. Some doors won't open, but some might. But you've got to persevere. If you're genuinely interested in pursuing a career in law, you have to persevere. Eventually, I was offered a paralegal position doing housing law at a firm in the East End. I hated it, but I took it. And it's very similar to what Raj had said, that sometimes you've just got to take a position and get your foot in the door. And that's what I did. I took up a paralegal role doing housing law, which I absolutely hated. And through that position, I was introduced to a criminal law firm. And I joined that firm and I remained at that firm for about 14 years. And once you're qualified, again, Raj is absolutely right. It's so much easier to secure other positions elsewhere. It's just getting qualified. And I know the speakers that have spoken before me have spoken about the traditional routes of qualifying, which is the LPC training contract or the bar. I don't think it's called the bar vocational course. The BPTC, I think it's called now, and doing a pupillage. But there are other ways of qualifying. You can now qualify by doing an apprenticeship. You can now qualify through that. Is it Silex and Filex and all these other alternative routes? So consider those as well. You don't have to go down the traditional route. So the next word that I had on my list was networking. Networking for me was a real problem because networking for me was so out of my comfort zone. It was unbelievable. And what I always used to think, what am I going to talk to these people about? Am I really going to find somebody that is interested in gangster rap and football and I don't know what the cricket results are, because that's my background. That's what I was brought up on: football and hip hop and rap and pop culture, and going to Lincoln's Inn, because that's the inn I was at, and dining there during my bar vocational course. I just felt I had nothing in common with the people that were sat to my left, to my right, and in front of me. But I now realize that networking is really, really important. And it's really important that you take advantage of networking, build your contacts. You never know, you might leave a mark on somebody. Somebody might remember you. And what I always tend to do now is whenever somebody passes me their business card, if they don't pass me the business card, I will ask for a business card when I'm out and about. And I will always send them an email. A day or two after I've met them, I'll send them an email. Because what you're doing is you're just getting people to know that you're out there, and getting people to realize that you're somebody that exists. Because my paper application, in all honesty, if I submitted an application for a training contract or a pupillage, was not the strongest. So it had to be me that had to sell myself. So networking is really, really important. There are so many opportunities to go out and network now. So just get yourself out there and speak to people, build up your contact list. The third thing I want to speak to you about is work experience. And what I would like to think is that you don't see it as something that is simply just to put on your CV that you've done some work experience. Okay, it's much more important, than that. And the reason I say that, I come from a high street practice background. I do crime, and as a firm we do family law. So it's the traditional high street practice. What you've got to do is you've got to see it as an opportunity to sell yourself, okay? Not just being there going through the motions. You know, leave a mark on the individuals that you're spending time with, okay? Do a bit of research on the firm, go in there, have a genuine interest for the area of law that you're trying to pursue, ask sensible questions, show a genuine interest, like I say. You know, when I have somebody who's doing work experience with me, I'm not, you know, anybody can actually quote me the law because it's available on Google, isn't it? You know, if I said to somebody, can you give me the definition of theft? Like, so I can only go by crime because that's what I do. If I said to somebody, can you give me the legal definition of theft? You know, you can Google that. Anybody can read what's on Google. Anybody can open up a law book. But what I want to see is I want to see a bit more than that. I want to see that you're able to apply the law. I want to see that you're a bit more interactive with individuals. I want to see that you can deal with clients. I want to see much more than that you're just asking me questions that you think you should be asking. You know, as a criminal lawyer, Zinat knows this, and I can see Colin there. Hi, Colin. You guys know this. You guys know that we're not just lawyers. We're social workers. We're people that provide advice to people who are at their lowest point in their life. We deal with drug addicts. So we have to put on so many different hats. So I'm not just interested when I've got somebody with me doing work experience to see that they can quote the law, that they know about the theory. I want to see how they interact with people. So what I guess what I'm saying there is understand where you're doing your work experience and understand what skills might be required whilst you're doing that work experience, and then just shine. Just go there, shine, and leave a mark. You know, everybody that does work experience when he says, "Oh, can I have a training contract? Can I have a training contract?" The reality is that not most people, or most firms, will not give you a training contract straight away. They want to see what you're like. They want, and often you'll get a paralegal role that will lead to a training contract. So not every firm has a vacancy there and then, but if you've left a mark with somebody, you know, that firm will think, you know what, actually that person was quite good. Why don't we give them a ring? Because it saves on interviews and all this kind of stuff. So it's important that you leave a mark and you take work experience seriously as well. The final thing that I just want to talk about is don't think that anything is beneath you. Now, what I mean by that is see everything as a learning opportunity. So, for example, if you've got into a firm as a paralegal and they say to you, do you know what, we're short on reception today. Can you just cover reception for an hour during lunch break? I don't think that they're asking you to do something that's inappropriate. See it as a learning opportunity. See it as an opportunity that you are going to be speaking to clients on the telephone, that's a skill. See that you're going to be meeting clients, that's a skill. Seeing that you're going to be speaking to other members of staff that you wouldn't have ordinarily spoken to. So just embrace that as an opportunity. Likewise, if I gave somebody 5 legal aid applications to do, it's a skill to be able to complete a legal aid application. So seize everything as an opportunity, because what I say to people is that once you build a foundation, then you can build upon that. So you need the basics, you need the foundations. And it also shows to your employer that you're prepared to do extra stuff, you're prepared to go the extra mile. There's many times I've had to make teas when I started off in my career. In fact, I still do make tea. I make tea for my secretaries, I make tea for my support staff. It's all about just being a humble person, in my opinion. I like humility when I see somebody coming to do work experience. And what I like is to see that this person can relate to other individuals and is actually genuinely caring about what they want to do. The last thing, I don't know if I'm running out of time, I probably am, is don't just think that there are these, like I've already said, these traditional routes of qualifying. There are many, many other ways to qualify. It may take slightly longer, but if you can get in there and start working through that, eventually you'll qualify. I'm not going to say much more. I think I've spoken for quite some time on it. And again, if you do have any questions, then please do ask me. So I hope that's all right, Zina, unless you want me to talk about something else a bit longer.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Zed. I think a really inspiring story, and I've known you a long time and didn't know some of that. And I think some real golden nuggets there to take away, so thank you. And also just a reminder for people, I can see that we are getting a bank of questions, which is great, because we'll come on to those at the end. If there are any more that have arisen from what Zed has said, then please continue to put them in. And I think what I'll do now is just kind of move on to sharing with you a bit more about my journey. So, as you know, I am a barrister. I was called to the bar in 2013. And although I still feel like I'm kind of a junior, it's actually quite sad that I'm no longer a junior, and I'm kind of more of a, bit more grown up and supposed to be anyway. So in terms of, I wanted to share, similar to Raj, a bit about my kind of background before the bar and just kind of my journey to it. I'm a Brummie, so I don't know if that will come out in some of what I say today. It possibly could. I'm the youngest of 5 girls. My mom and dad came over from Bangladesh in the 60s and 70s. Didn't get to complete any kind of formal education or anything like that. And dad came over to the UK in order to financially provide for his family back home. And that's how we kind of ended up here. And some of you might or might not be aware of how culturally there is a thing, in some cultures I should say, there is a thing about boys kind of being more revered than girls, and that kind of links into what Raj was saying earlier about her Pink Laddu campaign. And that's kind of why I'm the youngest of 5 girls, because I was clearly supposed to be a boy, as were probably most of us, but mom and dad gave up by the time they got to me. But what I'm trying to say is, although there was that kind of cultural pressure around women having sons as opposed to daughters, my parents would really, despite their lack of formal education, they were very much pioneers in our community, in that they massively encouraged and pushed education for all 5 of their girls, even though kind of in the wider community that wasn't really the done thing, so to speak. So I've always come from kind of a family where I was always empowered to think that I could achieve. And, you know, I'm from that kind of family that if I came home from school with a report that had a B on it, it would be like, you know, why have you got anything less than an A? And similarly, although I ended up at the local comp, quite a bad comp actually in Birmingham, my mom and dad tried to put me through the 11 plus and get into a grammar school, but I flopped the 11 plus. I still don't understand what those non-verbal reasoning shape things are, or how that's an assessment of intelligence, but anyway, that's just me. So it was kind of like I ended up going to the school that I did, managed to do okay grades wise, and went on to college, again, just a normal mainstream college. And I kind of always knew that I wanted to do law or something around some form of advocacy, because it was kind of that thing of having an inherent sense of like what was fair, what wasn't fair, and wanting to kind of be an advocate when things weren't fair or when somebody had done something wrong. So I quite early on knew that I wanted to be a barrister. Did my year 10 work experience in a solicitor's law firm in Birmingham. And then all of my A-levels and all of that was kind of guided towards knowing that I wanted to be a lawyer. When I was at college, because I had done well in terms of GCSEs and A-levels, kind of people around me encouraged me to consider applying for Oxbridge. And again, that's kind of the thing that's always done, isn't it? When somebody's bright or shows promise, there's kind of this perception about what defines ultimate success or ultimate prestige or all of that. And there's obviously no doubt that there is a level of prestige attached to those kinds of institutions. And obviously a lot of the bar is still representative of those types of organizations. But somehow even the 17, 18-year-old me knew myself well enough to know that that wasn't the institution, the type of institution that I believed I would, number one, be able to be myself, and second of all, be an organization or institution where I would thrive. And so actually my first choice was always the University of Warwick. And that was my first choice. I got in and I went, and that was the best 3 years of my life for lots of reasons. But I should say that when I first started uni, I felt totally out of my depth. The jump from A-level to uni, as many of you will know, is huge. I felt like I was surrounded by super smart people, international students, people that had gone to amazing schools, colleges, and I was kind of the little old brummy me, like totally out of my depth. But I just kind of plodded along and carried on and tried to do what I could. And I remember everyone banging on about this thing called a 2-1. Like I never really understood. All I ever understood was that, you know, when you talk about a degree, everybody should aim for a 2-1. So my first year I scraped to 60, which I was really chuffed about because I was like, okay, fine, that's a 2-1. I'm on course, all will be well. In my second year, I think I grew in confidence in terms of like friendship groups and doing things outside of academia. So I was heavily involved in the Law Society, the pro bono stuff. I think that's also where I began to really kind of solidify my activist kind of interests through, you know, amnesty societies, Palestine societies, and all of that kind of stuff. And somehow by the end of my second year, and Raj will remember this and she'll giggle because I'm going to tell the story, Raj and I became friends towards the end of second year and into our third year. But I actually managed to get a first in my second year and I came top of my year. And I'm only sharing this because it was hilarious, but mainly because I didn't understand how. And I ultimately graduated with a first at the top of my year from Warwick. And the only reason I share that is not because I'm like, wow, look at me, I got a first from Warwick. But it's very much because I feel like you can be, irrespective of your journey, and even when you might feel like you're not good enough or other people around you actually underestimate you, which happened a lot, that isn't and doesn't have to be reflective of how you go on to achieve or what you do. And it was just a massive eye-opener for me because I don't think I believed in myself, frankly speaking. And I think what that did, and that's why I say Warwick was transformative for me, is it gave me a confidence boost that I didn't have before. And it was, I think, from then that I began to really thrive in believing that, you know what, I can achieve what I want to achieve. And I think that, and some of you might experience this, that there's a lot of exposure at universities to the corporate commercial route, whether that's at the kind of solicitor level or the chambers level. In my day, there still wasn't very much exposure to careers at the bar at all. And it was very much a path that if you wanted to pursue, you had to carve it out yourself. And I just remember always being like presentations for various Magic Circle firms on campus, and there was never really anything else. And if you know that you want to do something, you have to really kind of be strong in that, because it's really easy when you see all the people around you applying for summer vac schemes or training contracts at these firms to make you feel like maybe that's what you should be doing. And I guess my words of advice would be for anybody that might be thinking of pursuing a path that isn't the mainstream path that everyone's talking about. That's totally okay. It might be harder because there's less exposure to it, but it's possible. There will be challenges, but it is doable. And after Warwick, I had a gap year. I was supposed to go on to LSE to do my master's straight away. I wanted to do a master's in public international law because I'm a bit of a nerd and I loved that when I was studying that in undergrad. And long story, but for various reasons, I didn't get my offer in that year. And at the time, I was absolutely gutted. And it's a reminder of, even when things feel like they're going amazingly, nothing ever is always amazing. There's always going to be some kind of issue that arises or an obstacle, and your plan will never be what you think it should be. And it's about trying to adapt to those scenarios. So in my gap year, I actually carried on working for the University of Warwick. They basically can't get rid of me. And even now, 10 years on, I'm lecturing for them. So don't burn your bridges. But for my gap year, I worked for the Warwick Centre for Human Rights. So I was doing some research stuff, and I used the year to really kind of develop myself. I did loads of internships, volunteering, I did some stuff abroad. So actually, although I was really sad about not getting my offer the first time round, it ended up being a really valuable use of my time in order to develop myself and also my applications. Following year, I went on to LSE, enjoyed that, and that's when I was applying for pupillage. So I was applying pre-BPTC, and I think Alex was saying the same, I think. And as I say, it's not really an area that I had much exposure to, because at uni there wasn't really much exposure to it. So you're kind of just fumbling along and trying to figure out your way. And I, again, like Raj, a lot of my interests are social justice centered, human rights, activism, all of that. And given that that was my background, you kind of go into the application process thinking that there are particular places that you want to be or that you should be. And all I will say to anybody who, and it links into what others have said, there are particular firms or chambers that are your kind of dream firms. I would say a couple of things. The first thing is, they're only your dream firm or dream set because of what you perceive that place to be, and based on their website or people that are there or all the glamorous stuff around it. That does not necessarily reflect the inner workings of that particular organization. And second of all, I'm a firm believer of you always end up where you're supposed to be, because for whatever reason, where you are is where you end up progressing in the way that you have. So if, for example, I hadn't ended up at 25, which I'll tell you about in just a second, then I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing now. And so I think it's really important that even if there are situations where you feel disheartened, just always be open to having a path that is a bit more varied, and just have faith and trust in the fact that it will be okay. So the pupillage stuff, again, I like to think I'm quite hardworking, and Raj hopefully will testify to that. But in some ways I was a bit of I should have maybe focused a bit more when it was the applications and stuff. So I did the pupillage gateway ones and a couple of non-gateway ones, and was lucky enough to get a fair amount of first round interviews, which ultimately converted into a pupillage offer from 25 Bedford Row. And that was pre-BPTC. But again, what I'll tell you about that is I remember interviewing at 25 Bedford Row first round. Here's me walking in thinking it's just going to be a chat, because everyone had told me first round interviews are just like oh, hi, how are you? Talk about your CV. But I walked in and there was like an advocacy exercise, which was a bail application at the time, and a whole set of like 3 debate questions. And there was 15 minutes to prep it. And I was like, oh my God. And I started hyperventilating, or like deep, like I couldn't breathe basically, because I was like, oh my God, do I walk out now to save myself the embarrassment? Bearing in mind, I've never bloody done a bail application because I hadn't even done the BPTC at that point. But then I was like, all right, I started saying some prayers in my head, because that's just what I do. So try to calm myself down. And I was like, right, just write anything down, just do whatever. And luckily I had like a really, really lovely interview panel. Blagged it, or I thought I was blagging it, thinking I'll never hear from them again. That's totally fine, but at least I had something to say. And lo and behold, got a second round interview. And again, that interview was really refreshing because it was different from my experience in other chambers. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. You might think that you're supposed to be at a particular place, but that's not necessarily actually the case. and different places will relate to you in different ways. I remember when I walked into 25 Bedford Row, the receptionist was super friendly, everybody seemed normal, there was people from different unis, different backgrounds, diverse membership. And then I'd been to other chambers for interviews, ones that I thought were my dream set, and just felt an instant sense of, this isn't quite right. So 25 I've been at for pupillage, and then obviously got taken on as a tenant. It's a criminal defence set, so my early years of practice were hardcore criminal defence. It's really, really, really difficult, but it's also really exhilarating in a lot of ways. I don't think, and Alex might have a different experience because obviously I'm biased, but for me, I don't think anything trains you in terms of being able to deal with a really scary situation more than criminal practice does, when you're like sent to go to court and deal with a horrible judge with no papers, or you've got 5 cases in one court and you're trying to manage all of that. I think if you can do that, then anything else you go on and do, the skills are transferable. And the reason why I say that is, although I started off in criminal defence, as of coming up to 3 years now, I've been working as junior counsel to the Grenfell Tower inquiry. So a kind of total change in track in terms of its public law. And I was actually really grateful and kind of privileged for the opportunity, because obviously my background has always been in human rights, public law-ish, international law, and it was a kind of a different skill set. And I think what's really interesting is if you're lucky enough to be able to have different practice areas, you'll find that it will kind of satisfy different bits of your interests. And so crime was amazing for me in that I love advocacy. I love being able to kind of advocate for somebody, make an argument, be persuasive, and see that something has happened on the back of my arguments. But what I really like about what I'm doing at the minute is it's kind of looking at more systematic policy issues and the power of influencing in that kind of way. So that's what I've been doing. And I guess outside of the mainstream lawyering stuff, one of the reasons that I set this project up is just because I am really passionate about there being better representation at the bar, at the legal profession generally. Some people have already alluded to this in their presentations. There's absolutely no doubt that there are issues, massive issues with diversity and inclusion across the legal profession. More needs to be done about it. And that's kind of sometimes when I wake up in the morning, and I do love being a lawyer, and it depends what day you ask me, and we all have, I'm sure, parallel dreams about being something else. But one of the reasons that I continue to stay in this is because I really believe that there has to be more people that can act as kind of perhaps a hope for other people that may not have, that maybe want to do this, but don't feel that they can, or they don't see people that are like them in the profession. And these kinds of platforms, I hope, are really useful in just trying to share some of those journeys that hopefully maybe resonate with some of you. And that kind of links into kind of my key pieces of advice that I'd written down, which I'll share with you because I'm conscious of the time. The first one I've written is really understand why it is that you want to be a lawyer, whether it's a barrister, a solicitor, whatever it is. Really just allocate some time to really sit down and think about why is it that you want to do this profession. It sounds like a really basic question, but I feel like so many of us live our lives without really asking ourselves why we're doing things. And often you do hear from people that wake up 10, 20, 30 years stuck in a job that they may not actually want to be in, or that hasn't fulfilled them in that way. So I'd ask yourself to really do some soul searching and figure out what is your why when it comes to this profession, because it takes a lot of resilience in order to kind of overcome the various hurdles. And those hurdles will be different for different people. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. The other thing I've thought about and I've written about, and this is because it resonates with my experience, is really think about what your values are as a person and also your identity. Now, for me, and one of the things that I share a lot is my personal story, mainly because for me, my identity has really shaped my identity as a lawyer. So being British, Muslim, Bangladeshi, Brahmi, all of those things, that sometimes you can be put in situations where you're made to feel that I need to be less of those things or less of me. And although earlier on, kind of when I was a bit more junior and perhaps as a pupil, it takes a lot of courage to retain your sense of self and to be who you are. And I guess my words of wisdom is to have the courage in who you are and have the conviction to never feel like you have to compromise. There will always be situations where you've got to feel like you've got to be a bit more like other people. And sadly, I know of people that have had to adapt to feel like they fit in. That's something that I consciously and absolutely have always made a decision that I would never ever do, because I was like, well, if I can't be myself, then why am I doing this? And I'll get a basic example, and Zed mentioned about the networking. I absolutely hate networking, and I hate it because it's all alcohol centered, and for some that's great. I'm sure people love it, but actually there are a number of people that aren't comfortable in those settings. And I really struggled with that early on, because you're being forced to be in situations that you don't want to be in, but you have to do it, because if you don't, then you're going to miss out on certain opportunities. I'm glad to say that things are beginning to change, or there's a bit more kind of mindfulness to those types of issues, and there needs to be more of that. But what I would say to anybody who might have some of those concerns or reservations, have the confidence to say, actually, this doesn't make me comfortable, so I won't be coming, or do whatever you're happy to do on your terms. So what I used to do was go for half an hour, have a lemonade, and then go. And that I was okay with that. That was when I was a pupil. Now I'm just really antisocial and don't bother, because I guess when you get to a certain level of seniority, it doesn't matter anymore. Or you grow in the confidence to say, sorry, I don't want to come because I don't want to. And hopefully, but it's not just about moaning though, and it's not a moan, but it's not just about saying you don't want to be there, but it's also about thinking about the practical things that you can then put into place. So if there are people that identify with you or your background or your story as to why something makes you feel uncomfortable, then you can kind of be that advocate to make that change. So for example, okay, let's do an alternative social, let's all go for pizza, let's all have coffee and cake. Do you know what I mean? So it's about sticking true to your values, whatever they are, and also shaping them into your identity as a lawyer. So now I spend a lot of time talking to people that might come from similar backgrounds to mine, feel some of those barriers, because I feel like I have to. I feel like it's a responsibility, and I feel like there's been a lot of sacrifices made for me to get to where I am, and therefore I have an absolute duty to give back in that way. Yeah, and the last one, it kind of links into that about just having the courage to be the thorn. I call it that, but you might have your own kind of phrasing. There are going to be things that you see that you won't agree with, that you won't be happy with, that aren't fair, that aren't just. And as lawyers, we all have this intrinsic sense of fairness. And what I would say is have the courage to kind of be that thorn. If something isn't okay with you, then, you know, find a tactful way of calling it out. Because when we don't, it means that those things continue to be legitimized. And if we do that, then things will never change. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, like I said, there are lots of different barriers and hurdles, and they're different for different people, and everybody has them. But the world relates to us all in different ways. But what I would say is that one thing that I'm big on is not selling this rose-tinted kind of view of being a lawyer or getting to the bar or getting to be a solicitor. And I remember kind of when I was going through the ranks, it would be made to sound as if it was this thing that, right, these are the steps, do it and you'll be fine. And once you get there, you'll be fine. But it doesn't just stop even when you get there. Like, this is kind of a mentoring platform for aspiring lawyers and students. But actually, even when you get in, there's still a lot more work to be done. So no doubt each and every one of you as a law student or as an aspiring lawyer, even that is a platform and a privilege, because you're in a position to give back to other people in different ways. So think about that, and also think about when you do get to wherever you get to, whether you're going to be a commercial lawyer, you're going to be a barrister, whatever your practice area is. Maybe you're not an activist and you're not into the social justice stuff, and that's totally cool too. But my last thing that I would say, and I hope this stays with you, is regardless of what you go on to do, just remember that with your platform comes privilege. and we all have a duty to recognise our individual privilege and to give back in some way, and that will be different to us for us all. But I just and that kind of links into why I'm so pleased that so many people have been so interested in this platform, and the guys and Raj that's joined the session today. Just everyone wants to give back, and that's what I really love about a lot of lawyers that I know, that people, and you guys probably have seen this as well all over LinkedIn, people offering their time, trying to do stuff. So whatever it is, you know, you might not be a lawyer yet, but you've got something that somebody else will benefit from. So I think I'll wrap up, because if you let me, I'll talk forever and ever and ever. So I hope that helps. And if there's any more questions, then feel free to put them in the box. I'm going to begin probably going through them and then ask the relevant person to answer them, if that's okay. Okay, so I'm just going to roll to the top. Alex, I think these related to when you were speaking. Questions about Inns of Court scholarships, any other scholarship funding options, and have you got any tips for Inns of Court scholarship interviews? And do you know any organisations that take on employed barristers?
Me again. Hi there. Please feel free to step in, other people, if you know the answer to this. I'm going to take a punt, but I really, don't know. So apart from the Inns of Court scholarship and university scholarships, is there any way to? I would say when I was looking at it, again, this was sort of 7 years ago for scholarship applications for BPTC. The Inns of Court and the providers were the only ones I could find. There are loan options, but then you have to pay it back, hence the word loan. But for the scholarships, I have a bit of advice as to Inns of Court scholarships. Oh, that was the next question. The first would be as to picking your Inn of Court to apply to. So there are 4 Inns of Court, as everyone knows. You can choose one Inn of Court to apply for scholarships to. Inner Temple and Middle Temple, I'm at Middle, interview everyone. And so everyone gets an interview and you get the opportunity to sell yourself in person. Gray's Inn and Lincoln's Inn have an initial paper sift, whereby you don't get invited to interview if you don't make the grade effectively. So my advice always is, if you think you're really good on paper, i.e. you've got really good academics or you've got experience that you think will stand out, you might want to choose one of the inns that give more money to fewer people and interview fewer people. But if, as I was in that position, you feel that you weren't so good on paper, i.e. your academics are just average and you've got all right experience, but you could really sell it because your experience might not sort of talk for itself. You might consider applying to one of sort of Middle Temple or Inner Temple. So a lot of people will give advice as to which inn to join. For me, at least, it's much for muchness. They all give you food, and they all, you all have a lovely time in the dinners as part of your qualifications, and it's hugely intimidating every time you go. But look how much money you could get out of them. The next is, so that didn't really answer the question, and the reason is I don't know.
I'll come in with just a couple of options there, Alex, if that's all right. Just only because they just come to mind now. 2 that I'm aware of is the Kalisha Trust offers a scholarship and various other bursaries. So that might be worth looking at, but I think that's limited to people that are interested in pursuing a career at the criminal bar. And then also there's this thing that I always looked at but never did, called the Law Reform Essay Competition. And apparently if you win that, you get like a good chunk of money. So they're worth looking into. Yeah, and I'm with Inner Temple, just to say the other side of the coin. And the reason why I applied was, first of all, I was told that they were the most progressive. Don't know if that's true, but and also that they had yummy food. And thirdly, that they interviewed everybody. And so, yeah, I thought maybe I'd have a better chance. You got any tips for scholarship interviews, Alex?
So my scholarship interview at Middle Temple, they asked sort of pretty obvious questions. So they asked me why I wanted to be a barrister. They asked me, well, this was a hard one. Do you have a favorite case? And I'm like, who has a favorite case? But the only case I could remember was a criminal case. It was the one of, is it R.V. Brown, the really horrible one?
Yeah,
that's the only one I could remember. Like, my CV shouted like public law and human rights and all this sort of stuff, and I came up with, was it the sadomasochistic case? Anyway, so I couldn't think of any case, and I had to explain then why I found that to be my favorite case. But yeah, so what I would advise in terms of preparing for scholarships interviews is you will be asked obvious questions, so have an answer to them. And when I say have an answer, what I did and found useful was to write out my mock answer to, why I want to be a barrister, not learn it from rote, but, then I have a structure from which to hang my answer on when I'm doing it off the top of my head. So why I want to be a barrister, I want to be a barrister for these 3 reasons. And then, have that sort of structure there so that when you're nervous on the day, you always have your preparation to fall back on, which is something that I need to keep telling myself when I keep doing cases as a barrister. So that's what I would advise, doing mock answers to pretty obvious questions. And then just knowing what your experience is inside out. So if you put something on your CV that sounds interesting, you're likely to be asked about it. So, your, I don't know, football medals or whatever, you're likely to be asked about it. So note what is on your CV such that you could answer questions about it. Those are probably my advice for the interviews. Does anyone else have any advice as to scholarship interviews?
I would just add that for inner temple, and I don't know if you had the same, there was also half an hour allocated to a problem question, which I can't remember anything about now because I'm that old. But they gave you these papers, you had to go prep it. I think you got like half an hour to prep it, and then they would ask you about it. But that's kind of only half the interview. So just, I guess, approach that in the same way that you would approach a problem question whilst you're at uni. What Alex said about giving structured answers where you signpost your key points. I think I found that in life, in legal life, even if your substance isn't great, if you structure it well, you'll be fine. And just signpost because it sounds like you know what you're talking about. And then other than that, I totally agree with know your application inside out and have 3 points to be able to talk about it confidently and cohesively. I know my pupillage interview, 2nd round, I got asked about something I'd put down about it was like the hobbies section. I'd written that I danced at my sister's wedding, and that's what I was asked about, and it ended up being a conversation about belly dancing or something. So literally know your application inside out. Next one, Alex, is for you, I think. Do you know any organisations that take on employed barristers?
So when you're applying for pupillage, every chambers or organisation that's going to offer pupillage have to advertise through the pupillage gateway. They don't have to use the pupillage gateway to do their applications, but it's a regulatory requirement apparently that they advertise on the pupillage gateway. So if you go to literally the pupillage gateway, I think .com or something, and look to which organisations are offering pupillage, even companies, etc., that are offering pupillage will have to advertise that through there. So I know lots of solicitors firms ask for barristers, and a couple now can offer pupillages, etc., etc. So all I would say is if you're looking for a pupillage in a different place other than a chambers, they will always have to be on the pupillage gateway anyway. The other point is the government obviously employs quite a lot of barristers. So look to their scheme because they have a completely different application process. I think I applied for the government scheme and I didn't get through the 1st round because it was I think it was like the squares and the circles and things like that.
Oh my God.
Those sort of things. And I was like, I just don't understand what's going on. I want to be a barrister. I don't want to be like a square circle artist person. And so I failed. But yeah, so government, look at that if you fancy that sort of work.
Cool, thanks, Alex. This is probably a more general question. How have you found COVID-19 has affected you, especially with barristers being mainly self-employed? In terms of me, I'm really lucky that I can still work from home, doing the inquiry stuff. So in that sense, it's not been a great deal different to what I would normally be doing. I know for people that have court practices, obviously there's been a lot of upheaval and stuff's been moved online. Alex, do you have anything that you want to add on that point?
I think I'm in the same boat. My practice being public law and private client trust stuff is quite heavily paper based. So when outside of quarantine, I spend a lot of time in the library, etc. So my life hasn't really changed that much. But again, for those who are more likely to be in court every day, obviously it's changed, albeit court has now gone online, which means hopefully more people will have access to Skype and things like that. So it hasn't really affected me, but I know some of my colleagues are quite heavily affected because they go to court more often.
Yeah. Zed, have you had any experience of how COVID-19 is affecting your work? Mr. Scott Zed, he is there.
Hi, Zina.
Hiya.
Yeah, we're normally in court every day, and the criminal justice system has been pretty, in my opinion, has been pretty slow on technological advances in any event, and the infrastructure really isn't in place in the criminal courts. So obviously, police are still investigating crimes, so people are still being arrested. There is obviously this concern about individuals at the police station and social distancing. It's not possible because a lot of these interview rooms are very, very small. So there is a bit of an uproar really amongst the criminal fraternity, the criminal lawyers, about how those lawyers are being protected either at the police station and at court. Like Alex just said, a lot of the hearings now are trying to be done remotely via video links, but a lot of hearings have been adjourned. And you may have read or you may have seen that trials of longer than 3 days aren't taking place anymore. So jury trials, I think in fact most jury trials have come to an end. I look at Colin. Colin may have some more information about the Crown Court. So COVID has really impacted on the amount of people that are going through the criminal courts at this moment in time. They're still running, but they're running at a very, very, very reduced service. And a lot of people, I know the NHS workers and the other frontline staff get mentioned, but the lawyers that are keeping the wheels of justice moving don't get any mention at all. And we should mention them as well, because a lot of people that I speak to when they come and do work experience to me, as far as I'm concerned, the health profession is right there at the top, because your health is your most important thing. And then what I say to them after that, in my opinion, the second most important thing you can have is your liberty and your freedom. And there are lawyers out there. I've been furloughed, so that's how it's impacted on me. I don't need to go to work, but there are some of my colleagues are still working and doing this frontline stuff, putting themselves at risk as well and their families. So that's how it's impacted on the on the criminal side of things. Reduced hearings, a lot of cases have been adjourned.
Thanks, Ed. Next one's for you, Raj. Raj, you mentioned the feeling of discrimination and racism. I wanted to know how you dealt with it and what you did to overcome that feeling.
Yeah, before I get onto that, I will say that professionally, I'm feeling it in terms of COVID. I work for startups, and operationally, legally speaking, no one's got the budget for this anymore. I spent the first 2 weeks just, all my clients were calling me asking about furlough. So there was work there, but otherwise now everyone's in survival mode. So work is drying up, but, trying not to stay in scarcity mentality. Also in terms of lawyers I know who work in commercial practice, a lot of being furloughed. Obviously some deals are still going through. The commercial landscape is a bit weird right now. I think PE houses and stuff are going to try and buy things cheaply, so deals will still be done, but it's just a weird landscape. In terms of discrimination, that one really got me in the feels, actually. That question, I was staring at it when it came up and thought, shit, how am I going to answer this? I have experienced a lot of discrimination, a lot of racism, and I've experienced it at all levels. And it ranges from things like being told that the room smells like curry and I'm not the one eating it, so who is, all the way through to being bullied, to hearing people making comments about South Asian men who are working as paralegals, saying disparaging things about them, that they smell, and all kinds of other stuff. Really, really sexist things, partners making really awful comments, really lewd comments about women, about other women that work there. So I've seen it all, and I've seen it in all different kinds of roles in the firm, out the firm, consultant, freelance, commercial, startups. I've seen it everywhere. And what I will say is that I have spoken out about it every single time I've seen it. It has come at a big professional and personal cost. I've been fired every time. And people always be like, how can they do that? Well, they can do that. So, you know, your contract will be terminated. You know, if it's been less than 2 years, there'll be a spurious reason to fire you, or people will make your life difficult. Now, I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't speak up against these things. I think you should do what you feel comfortable with. But I have a big problem with this kind of notion that women of color and people of color are somehow responsible for fixing all the racism and sexism they see in the workplace. This whole idea that, like, if you don't speak up, sister, who's going to speak up? Well, I'll tell you what will happen if you speak up. You'll probably get fired. So don't speak up unless you feel comfortable with the consequences that you might suffer personally and professionally. You know, I have reconciled all the times I've been fired. I always put my hands up and say, you know, I'll find another job. God will feed me, blah, blah, blah. But then in my darker moments when I'm struggling to find work, I do sit down and cry and think, you know, I've actually paid for this financially. You know, like there's that work then gets given to other lawyers who perhaps are better at keeping their mouth shut than me. And that doesn't mean to say that I go into rooms and I, like, you know, throw pots and pans around and scream and say, you're effing racist, you're sexist. I've done it in really sort of nice ways. Like once I called my recruiter and said, my boss just said I smell like curry. Is this a problem? I got to the office the next day and my contract had been terminated. That was at Marks and Spencer's. In other places, I've talked to HR about it and then found that, you know, oh, my contract's not being renewed and all these other things aren't happening, even though I've had glowing reviews and all kinds of stuff. So I think there's always a risk of putting your head above the parapet. I don't really know what the solution is in terms of how do you cope with that. I just know that on a personal level, I've come to accept that the world is just shit. And, you know, you will do work that speaks to you and you know, find meaningful work and do that meaningful work. Speak up when you feel ready. Don't feel bad if you don't speak up. Don't feel bad if something happens and you didn't stand up to be counted. Because to be honest, I think a lot of people of color find themselves becoming martyrs to the cause. And it's just not fair. I think you shouldn't feel pressured to speak up against any of the stuff that you see, especially if you can't afford the financial consequences that would come with, you know, losing your job. And that might not be the advice that you want, but to myself, I would say 5 years ago, keep your gob shut. I mean, on some level, I'm happy I didn't keep my gob shut because I don't want to be in any of those places that did those things, and I'm glad they fired me. But equally, like, I've had to work really hard at not letting that ruin my life and literally, like, ruin my mental health as well. So I think in some instances, just keep your head down and just plow through. If you see shitty behavior, find somewhere else to go and just leave. You know, just it's not worth thinking that they're on your side. HR is not on your side. HR exists to protect the organization. I know this as a lawyer who works in HR as well. They are not on your side. So don't think that any of these places that actually talk about diversity actually give a shit. They're trying to probably just win clients over with it. I mean, that might sound jaded, but this is what I wish I knew. But I don't know how helpful that is. I'm just kind of the diarrhea.
Thanks for that, Raj. I know this wasn't addressed to me, but I might just come in on a little bit of it if that's okay. And I think it's really interesting because Raj is speaking obviously from her experiences, and some of that is perhaps slightly different to kind of some of the things that I was loosely saying a little bit earlier on. And I think what Raj said about doing what you're comfortable with doing is absolutely key, and not feeling like you've got to do stuff. I think in my experience, what I've been trying to do and kind of how I reconcile stuff in my brain is if the system is going to continue to be unjust, which it will, because every system is, whether that be on a kind of systemic criminal justice level, or whether you're talking about the injustice within specific spaces of organizations or cultures of firms or chambers or the bar generally, or whatever it might be. For me, as a kind of when I was more junior, I was more probably down the route of just kind of silently observing things that were said to me, and it kind of was building up and trying to figure out a way of dealing with it. And you actually absorb stuff without realizing what's been said to you. And I think, and obviously people will be different, but what's happened to me as I've gotten a bit more senior is actually it's gone the other way. It's kind of like, now I won't shut up. But there's a way of channeling that. So for example, if something had happened within an organization or somebody said something to me, my way of kind of outlet is making sure that every speaking engagement that I ever get, every workshop I ever deliver, every webinar that I ever do, I will be sharing the fact that this is a very real reality and this is what happens. And I think there are different ways of dealing with those issues, and you've got to find a way that works for you. I definitely do agree that when you're more junior, it can be very difficult. I know that as a pupil, I found certain things very hard because you're desperate to get taken on, you're desperate to get the, you know, a tenancy or offered a place as a solicitor or whatever it might be. But if you've got any particular questions on that, feel free to message any of us separately, and be happy to answer any more questions on that. Conscious of the time, people are free to drop off if you want to, but I'm just going to quickly try and get through as many of these as I can. Sahana asks, when applying for pupillage, how many mini pupillages and or legal experiences are expected from the applicant? Alex, don't know if you want to say anything on that. I'll just quickly say, I think we were told like 3 to 5 mini pupillages. Personally, when I look at applications and when I sat on pupillage committee, which I was on for a good 4 years or so until very recently, I thought mini pupillages are important, and they are, but I also get a bit bored of seeing a million mini pupillages unless they tell me something really interesting about you. I personally look at the other stuff outside of that, which tells me more about you as a character, your qualities, your values, what other work you've done, whether you've worked while studying, all of that kind of stuff. Alex, I don't know if you've got anything to add on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. For me, there are 3 uses for a mini pupillage. One is you see the reality of the job as a barrister, so that is really a personal thing for you. 2 is you see the environment of the chambers that you're doing it in, so pick the chambers that you actually think that you would like to apply to for pupillage. So don't really, you know, send out 50 applications and then you've got some random chambers that you would never want to go to. And 3, it obviously just goes in your CV as sort of a bung it on because you do 3 to 5 mini pupillages. But I agree, in terms of looking at the applications that come in, I would only give points or really like any credence to the mini pupillages whereby there's some sort of value in them. So there is no point doing 12 mini pupillages in an area of law that you're not applying to practice in. So if you have done, you know, a criminal mini pupillage and then you know you don't want to do crime, have something to say about that criminal mini pupillage if you're applying for like commercial work, for example. You know, I really enjoyed the advocacy element, but I found that my skills would be better placed in a different way. So yeah, I'd say 3 to 5, but have something to say for each of those mini pupillages and, you know, the value of each of them and why you did them. One thing about when you do mini pupillages, when I was doing them, when people do them with me, I find it useful to take down the name of the barrister you're doing it with, the type of case you're observing, what you've learned from that case, and then sort of like anecdotal stuff. So really you'll remember it when you're being asked about it in interview, or you can put down something interesting to make it stand out in your application. Otherwise you're sort of just sat there in the back of court for a week, sort of counting the wallpaper tiles or something like that. But yeah, those are my tips.
Brill, thank you. And all I would just quickly add on to that is mini pupillages are great, but also there's so much other work experience which is also really valuable, like, you know, voluntary work, stuff with charities, pro bono projects, community groups, all of that is valuable, as well as long as you kind of link it back to your application. A big shout out here for Raj and her book, which is great. Everybody should look into it. And the question is, I was wondering if anybody could give some advice for students studying non-law degree, how to break into the legal field, any tips on getting work experience, and also with choosing between the GDL and the SQE. Got to be honest, I'm not sure what the SQE is. Amanpreet, did you want to just clarify what that is? And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Zed to deal with this because he came from a non-law kind of background first. Raj's first degree was also science-based, so maybe she's got some stuff to add afterwards.
So I think a lot of firms do like the fact that you've not done a law degree. I think it's quite an attractive thing to put on your CV, especially the big commercial firms, is my understanding. But I'm from a high street background, so the GDL, I did the GDL as well. It's a very intensive 1-year course. I don't know whether you can do it part-time. I did it many years ago. And what was it? There was another aspect to the question about the SQE, wasn't it? The SQE, I think, is the new proposed solicitor's qualifying examination,
Yeah.
which my understanding is something that's going to replace potentially the original LPC. I'm not sure it's up and running yet. I don't think it is, but I understand there's been a lot of talk about it just being the standard that everybody does the SQE, and then they can qualify as a solicitor. I know there's a question just a bit further down about the LPC, and somebody and what I'll do is I'll tie it in with the answer to this question. And I think the question is should I do the LPC? If you're not going to become a solicitor, then there's no point, in my opinion, doing the LPC. Because ultimately, by doing the LPC, you're hoping to qualify as a solicitor at some point. The second thing is it's very, very expensive. And doing the LPC, there's no guarantee that you're going to get a training contract at the end of it. So again, you've got to take all these tips and advice that all these other people have spoken about. And really, it's got to be like a 16-pronged approach to trying to secure a training contract. You've got to do all these other things, and hopefully, you'll get that training contract. But the LPC and the BPTC are both very, very expensive courses. And again, like I said, universities don't tell you that it's very, very competitive and it's very, very expensive. They sell you a dream. This is one of the things that I have an issue with as far as universities are concerned, is that they should let you know how competitive it is and how difficult it is to secure pupilages and training contracts, because it's not easy. So the LPC is I'm not discouraging you from doing it. What I'm saying is that if you want to pursue that the solicitor's route, then do it. But again, I always mention there are other ways of qualifying. There are other ways of becoming an advocate, and look at those, because they may be cheaper. It may be easier to do it that way, financially and time-wise as well. You've got to take your own personal circumstances into account before you decide to embark on some kind of path. But the SQE is something that I think is potentially going to come in the future. So that's what it stands for, the Solicitor's Qualifying Exam. I don't know if Raj wants to add anything to what I've just said as well. I'll
Raj,
put myself on.
Thanks, Ed. Raj, do you know anything about the SQE, or do you have any kind of observations in relation to that question?
Yeah, so when the SQE was being proposed, I was sat with a partner at Travers, who was my supervisor, who was also on the consultation committee with the Law Commission and the Law Society about whether or not that should be brought in. And there was heavy resistance within the profession to the SQE, I should add. However, the sentiment that I understood, so by the time I'd left the firm, the SQE had kind of been established that this will happen at some point. Now, the first part of your question in terms of the GDL, in my personal opinion, law firms do not discriminate against people who are from a non-law background. It's generally 50-50, maybe even higher in terms of non-law background. It doesn't make a difference. I think they just accept that if you've got an aptitude for the profession, it doesn't really matter what you did before. I would actually say, if you're interested in something academically other than law, then do something else and then qualify over. It's just easier that way. The law degree isn't particularly fun. In terms of doing the GDL and LPC versus doing the SQE, it's difficult to know how hard the SQE will be. My fear is that it will be like an American-style monster bar exam. Like we know that the bar exam in America, where it's just this big beast of an exam that everybody has to pass. The idea was that you should be able to pass this exam regardless of whether or not you've got an LLB. And the ethos behind the SQE is to increase access to the profession, because right now there are too many stages. It's like GDL, LPC, they're all really expensive. I think it's a timing thing. So from my understanding is the SQE is being brought in next year, and they're phasing out the LPC and the GDL. It's not really about whether or not you should do one or the other. It's about when will you qualify and which one will be available to you. So if you've got more questions around that point, you can message me sort of directly on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have a further chat. But there will come a point where you don't have the option to do the LPC. And although they will be scrapping the LPC, it's very likely that College of Law and stuff will come up with a course that prepares you for the SQE that firms make you do before you can sit the SQE. So there will be a similar type of system that comes in to just replace these other courses. Don't forget that College of Law and University of Law are private equity backed, so they have to be turning a profit. They will find a way to commercialize all of this. So yeah, it's not really a choice, is my understanding, but we can pick this up later. But law firms have kind of just decided that they're still going to have all their other prerequisites, like 2-1 from a red brick, blah, blah, blah. Just because you pass the SQE with flying colours doesn't mean that they'll take you, which is what the SQE is supposed to be in spirit. It's supposed to be a leveller, but I don't think it will be.
Cool, thanks so much, Raj. Next question is from Elliot, I think earlier on in their legal career, so thank you for joining us. For university applications for an LLB or BA in law, does anyone have any tips as to strengthening a personal statement specifically for that course? Anybody want to take that? Alex, maybe?
Yeah, I've turned my microphone off because I have to go in a second. My video off, sorry.
Oh, no worries.
I remember casting my mind back a long time, but doing my personal statement, it was important at the time to focus on why you were applying to the course. And genuinely, as we were saying before, consider what the real reason is you're applying to the course. And if it is, financial reason, then think of a fluffy way of saying that without saying, I want to be paid big bucks. But if there is a genuine reason why you want to do a law degree, put that down and make it sound appropriate. So for me, when I was applying, it was that, social justice, wanting to help people, all that sort of stuff. And so I put all of that into my personal statement. In terms of like fluffing it out a bit, I looked to, recent news headlines about the sort of stuff that was going on in the world, and saying, at the time, it may have been something completely different to how the world looks now, but looking to what was going on and saying, I don't like what that looks like and it makes me angry, and therefore I want to be part of changing it in a very small way. And that sort of, it may sound vacuous, but that is the reason a lot of people go into the law. So that was my advice as to how to draft pre-university statements.
Thanks so much, Alex. And I know that you've just said you've got to go. I'm sorry for running over, but we really appreciate all of your advice and your time. And thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
It's all right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Cheers. Take care, Alex. Yeah, the only other thing that I would add onto the question about the personal statement is just really just to what we discussed earlier, like, why do you want to do it? Why do you want to study law? Is it because you want to be a lawyer? Is it because you're interested in it as a discipline? So I would have a section on why law, and then have a section on what you can add to what you can bring, and kind of your skills and stuff like that. One thing that I always like reading in any applications is generally like a genuine commitment and a genuine passion, and just finding a way of making it a bit creative, in a way that kind of suits you. So whether there's a particular anecdote, a story, something in the current affairs, and just use that as a spin-off perhaps. But I hope that helps, Elliot, and thanks for joining us. Kibria, I think Zed briefly dealt with yours about the LPC, so we'll skip over that if that's okay. Sarah, people say pupillage interviews are a step up from the in-scholarship interviews. Does the panel have any tips for pupillage interviews for anyone lucky enough to get through the paper sift? Yeah, I guess I'll take this question as Alex has left, but my advice would be to be prepared, depending on the nature of the kinds of sets that you're applying for. Be prepared for the nature of perhaps an advocacy exercise, or needing to speak through all of your application in detail. So kind of like what we said earlier on about knowing your application inside out and having the confidence to talk about it. Again, I'm not sure what areas you're interested in crime. There will undoubtedly be an advocacy element. So getting some public speaking experience, however you do that, and just feeling comfortable speaking to a panel and practice and stand up, delivering and things like that. I'd also just practice generally how you answer questions and just do it in a really structured way. So you know how Alex earlier on was saying about having kind of 3 points for each potential question. Do that for a pupillage interview. So look at your application, have a brainstorm about, okay, what possible questions could I be asked about this? and then make sure that you've got 3 points or 2 or 3 points that you can confidently talk about in relation to those aspects. There are going to be aspects in interviews that you will know about, i.e. you're going to talk about your CV, and there's obviously going to be unknown aspects, so a debate question or an advocacy exercise perhaps. So for those unknowns, it's really just about, even if you might be overwhelmed by the fact it seems scary and you don't know, it's what I said earlier, if you can kind of structure what you're saying in a clear way, people are really looking at how you articulate yourself, how persuasive you are, even if you're not familiar with the content, whether you can see both sides of the argument. The other thing that I'd say, that one of the things I did before pupillages is just doing lots of current affairs prep, legal affairs, know what's going on, do lots of reading, think about what the topical areas are, what you could be asked about, stuff like that. So I hope that helps. Move on to Iman. Hi, Iman. I think if you're the Iman that I think you are, I think you're Danish's niece. So thank you for joining. Thanks for your comments. You said that you've already applied, people you know have already applied for so many opportunities, commercial law based, whereas I feel like I haven't exactly settled on the path. And I'd like to take time, and this may be deferring me from applying altogether. Any advice? I'm just going to check if I've got any other. Zed's still left. I think Raj's left, so it's just me and Zed. So I think I'll respond, and then I'll ask Zed if he's got anything to add. What I would say is absolutely do not be afraid of taking the time to figure out what you want to do. And although that might be the non-common thing to do, it definitely will serve you better in the future, because the alternative is that you just do something that you're not entirely sure about. It requires massive investment, both financially and just your whole self. And you need to know that you want to do it. And what you will find is, in the time that you take out, you can develop yourself in lots of other ways. So for example, with me, I told you that I had a gap year, which I didn't actually initially want, but it ended up being great. I got to do loads of internships, volunteering, I went abroad, and then I did a master's, and the master's wasn't something that I needed for pupillage, but I just did that because it was something I wanted to do for me. And what I really appreciate when I go through applications for pupillage, and when I was on the pupillage committee in Chambers, is just people that have a bit more life experience about them. You know, you get some people that are fresh out of uni, literally going on this conveyor belt mentality, and then you get other people that have done lots of other interesting things. And I always personally think that it's those people that have potentially more value to add because they've just lived more. So I would not be afraid, even though you might be in the minority doing it. Really take the time to figure out what you want, because if this isn't what you want, this isn't the kind of career that you can do half-heartedly. That's what I would say. You need to absolutely know that you want it. So take that time and don't worry about what everyone else is doing. I personally know lots of people that went down that whole commercial route, conveyor belt mentality, ended up in fancy firms, but then have quit years on because they're not happy. So it's cool if you don't want to do that. Just take the time. Zed, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to that particular question.
Yeah, Azina, I agree with you. You have to walk the path that you want to walk, and don't feel pressured into doing something that you don't want to do. However, I also say to you, if you're not sure which direction you want to go, that I assume that there are some subjects that you enjoy doing at university. And for me, I always enjoyed doing crime, so I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I continue to enjoy doing criminal defense work. But why not give all these different areas of law a try? And what I mean by that is just get some work experience, because it will help solidify your decision. And the only way you're going to know whether you enjoy it is by going out and gaining some work experience. So pick a handful of subjects, try out, write to firms or chambers that do those areas of law, and give it a go. I think you'll find that once you've seen how, the truth is that a lot of people that do work experience with me will say it's nothing like what they expected it was based on the theory, the university side of things. And it's not. It's complete, in my eyes, it's completely different. So you really need to experience it. And one final thing that I do say is that, remember, I know I keep going on about it being a competitive environment. You know, you've got to make a decision at some point, potentially. But remember that there are other people behind you in year one who are eventually going to be doing their law degrees, who are eventually going to be doing the LPC, the bar vocational, and they're just entering the field as well. So it just becomes more and more competitive with more and more people trying to enter the profession. But I think Zinat's absolutely right. You don't need to be a sheep. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, at some point, you do need to make a decision. And the only way you can make that decision is to try it out in a week's spell of work experience at different places. Don't be afraid to try different areas of law, because that's the only way you'll get an idea.
Yeah, I
Hope
totally
that
agree with
helps.
that. That's really helpful, Zed. And actually what I should have said is, if anybody is on the fence between both the solicitor route and the barrister route, then that's absolutely even more of a reason to get work experience in both. Because then actually exactly what Zed said, you'll know actually you hate this, you love this, you can't see yourself doing this. And what you do when you get into an interview for the one that you actually want to do, you can say, well, I definitely know that the bar is for me, or the solicitor route is for me, because I've tried the other route, I've had a flavour of it, and that's how it solidified my choice. So for me, I have always known that I wanted to be a barrister, but I can't remember quite exactly how I got it, but I got a work experience placement. I think it was through a scholarship scheme at a firm in Chancery Lane. And it was really interesting, and I'm glad that I did it, but I automatically knew that it wasn't for me, but it was still something valuable on my CV, because it allowed me to say, you know what, I've tried this, it was interesting, but all it's done is reinforce my choice. So if you're not sure, keep your fingers in different pies with the view of trying to ascertain what it is that you're passionate about and what you want to do. Obviously, when you do get to the time of applying for whatever you do decide to do, you'll just need to be able to say with clarity that you do want to do the thing that you've applied for, because sometimes it can seem that somebody's application is just all over the place. Like if you've done too many things in too many different areas without explaining why, it can seem, well, does this person really have a commitment to criminal law when they've done 5 many pupilages at a commercial set? So obviously just think sensibly about how you're presenting yourself on paper. Hopefully that's helpful. I think that might be the end of the questions. I'm just going to do a quick roll down. Thanks, Lauren, for your comments. I'm glad it was helpful. Recording, yes, once I figured out the tech, I will make it available and I'll send it out. Thank you. Sahana, thank you for the speakers, helpful, great, and Iman too. Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for the 14 or 15 of you that have stayed right to the very end, and we're like half an hour over, so I'm really sorry about that, but I hope it was useful. There's going to be another session next week on CVs, applications and interviews. I will send out the details. You guys will need to join the LinkedIn group if you're not on it already. And if you're all registered on Eventbrite, it means I've got your email addresses. So I'll be sending around the recording and information about next week's session. But yeah, I think that's all. So thank you so much. I hope that was helpful. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully see you again soon. Bye, everybody. Take care. And thanks so much to Zed for staying right to the end as well. Thanks, Zed.